Welcome back to the Triathlon Training Explained show powered by Training Peaks. This week we're going to be running you through how and why you should be doing a post-race analysis.
Yes, so the idea behind a post-race analysis is to essentially evaluate that race performance, determine what you're doing well, what you're not doing quite so well, where your strengths lie, and perhaps what needs tweaking in your training. And you may well actually be doing some of this already without realising.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's no point in doing race after race without taking a step back and working out how you're going to improve. And no matter how good you are, everyone should be doing this. And for example, the likes of Flora Duffy, Frodeno, Lionel and Alistair Brownlee will all be doing this.
Well, it can be all too easy to forget about a bad race and brush it under the carpet as if it never happened. But as much time as athletes spend on training and preparing for an event, probably the most effective use of time comes after the race.
Yeah, I mean, doing that post-race analysis will help you dictate what your day-to-day training is going to be like and help you to get more out of yourself. So today we're going to be discussing what exactly a post-race analysis is, what it involves, as well as getting some expert advice. Okay, before we get techie and start looking at the race data, you need to ask yourselves how you felt it went. And without looking at your place or your time you finished, it's about your own feeling of the race.
So for this, we're going to use something called a SWOT analysis that you might recognise from business, and we're going to adopt something similar for our post-race analysis. We're going to look at our strengths and weaknesses, what you did well, and maybe what you didn't do quite so well. I'm actually going to put you on the spot here, Heather, because I know you raced quite recently at the Croydon Ocean Triathlon. So what do you think went well? What were your strengths from the day?
Going in kind of chronological order, I think I got my swim start nailed. It was quite nice. It was just women on their own to start with, so had a good line to the first buoy. And I don't think I wasn't quite the quickest swimmer, but I got there first because I had the inside line. And that put me in a good state for the rest of the race. Then my next bit that was probably good on the bike, I got my nutrition. I'm not used to racing that kind of distance and at that intensity, so for me, doing nutrition on the bike is important. But it's more of an experiment, and I think I got it just about right. I drank enough, it was a hot day. And then on the run, it was very, very hilly, like ridiculously hilly. And I think that the strategy I took with walking up some of the steep hills, because I think I would have run slower, actually worked. And again, it's still, even with that analysis, I'm slightly probably actually analysing against other people, but other people that were in the race, because people ran past me up the hill, but I overtook them later on. So yes, that's still a bit of external feedback, I guess, but it felt like it was what was right for me.
Well, now let's move on to the weaknesses. What didn't go quite so well?
That's easier to do, I find. I think, like in the swim, I'm still not good at working hard enough. But it's hard to know for the pacing. A big error was coming out of the swim, and I just couldn't get my wetsuit off, and I don't know why. Like, I've done that. That's one thing I have done lots of times, and then I lost my concentration for a while in transition. And then again, my transitions are still very slow because they're still sort of Ironman transitions. So I take a seat and like try and get all my kit off, and then onto the bike. And I felt like I wasn't as strong on the bike as I'd hoped. Whether that's like a weakness or not, it's something that I was disappointed with, I guess. Onto the run, it was okay, but I think it was, and I don't know like what the answer for this is, but I struggled on the sand. So I was running on the sand, and I know I've made a video on how to run on sand. Maybe I need to go back and watch that.
Well, I guess this is really interesting actually, because you could come away from that event and be very despondent and negative about all these points that didn't go quite so well, or you considered weaknesses. But actually you could just see these as opportunities, things that you can improve your performance, you can work on in training. So actually, this is really exciting.
Well, actually some people like to write it down so that they know, they've got it and they can analyse it. Some just make a mental note. And I personally, talk through it with my coach, but I also write it, I put each section in my Training Peaks, and I actually just write little like analysis, I guess for myself, but also then my coach can share that, and you have got that reference. And however you do it, it then means you can make your training that much more specific.
Yeah, and I do know some athletes actually write blogs or race reports online.
It's quite interesting to read them as well, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're actually going to take this post-race analysis a step further now, and I'm actually going to call on one of my friends. He's a triathlon coach for Training Peaks and a certified Ironman coach, Phil Mosley. Okay, thank you for joining us today, Phil.
Pleasure to be here.
So we've already been talking a little bit about sort of those initial phases of the post-race analysis. Is there anything else you would do or discuss with an athlete?
I think going into it, you just think about some of the variables that might crop up in a race. I mean, in a triathlon, there's obviously 3 disciplines, there's transitions as well, and there's everything that goes before it leading up to it. So how you slept, how stressful your week had been leading up to it, your travel, all kinds of things, how healthy you've been. So there's so many variables even before you've started, and then there's so many variables in the race itself, and they all make a difference. So kind of important not to draw too many conclusions too quickly before you've thought about those things and what effect they might have had on your event.
I think that's a really important point, actually. I remember a lot of athletes, well, they kind of forget what's happened in the lead up to an event, and then suddenly you pry into it and you find out they've been moving house for a week before the event. So no wonder you're feeling a little bit naff on race day.
Yeah, I've had the same where I had a guy that I coached who had a problem with his bike, basically, and he didn't tell me about it, and he didn't have a very good bike leg. And then we talked about it, and I subsequently found out that his wheel wasn't working properly. And he hadn't mentioned it as to why he might have had a bad bike. So, yeah.
And then, of course, there are the other factors that maybe you can't control, weather, road conditions, and so yes, you could compare race results and timings, but if the road surface is much worse, or the weather, it's raining, it's wet, it's slippery, you can't really account for that.
No, it's also certain courses suit certain athletes better as well. So for me, I never did so well on hilly courses, and I might have a good bike split on a flat bike route, and then other people who I would have beaten in that one would beat me on a hilly route. And at first, I used to get disappointed about how I performed, and then I just kind of realised later they were just much lighter people than me, and they're always going to do better on a hilly bike route. So
okay, so we've spoken a lot about sort of our feelings and those other variable factors, but how about the hard data, the results?
Yeah, well, what I like to do is, rather than analyse a race on kind of feelings and looking at too many variables and getting worried about them all, I like to do some tests before someone races, maybe 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever, but within about a 3-month period of when they're going to race. So I get them doing a swim test, which is a CSS swim test, so that a 400 and a 200 time trial with a 5-minute gap in between. And you can work out what your average pace for 100 would be over a 1,500 metres race. So that kind of gives you some idea of what you might be expecting to do in the swim, and that gives you some baseline data to work from. On the bike, I would get them to do a CP20 test, which is a power test for 20 minutes, which you can project what you might be able to ride for an hour. Again, that gives you some good kind of benchmark figures to work from. And then running-wise, I'd either get them to do a 5K race or a threshold running test, which is essentially a 30-minute time trial. And once you've got those 3 tests and the data from those, you kind of got quite a good idea of how you should pace that race and what you might be expecting to achieve from it. And without those kind of figures, you're kind of guessing, really. So,
yeah, so you could be disappointed with a result, but actually that was probably what you expected.
Absolutely. Often people are disappointed because their bike split, for example, wasn't as fast as it had been previously, but it was a windy race or whatever, bad road surface. And when you look at the power data compared to what they've done in their test, it turns out they've done really well and they didn't realise it. People can get quite down about these things until they see what actually happened. And that's kind of why analysing a race is really important.
So one of the things I hear time and time again when people are looking at their results is that, I beat such and such in the last race and now they've beaten me. Oh, it's a terrible race. What do you think to that kind of thing?
Well, it's kind of a fun thing to do, isn't it? And I must admit I do it myself, and I bet you do as well. You can't really get much from that because someone might have had a bad day, or they might not have been fit, or they might have been taking it easy because they had a bigger race coming up, or they might have had a cold, or any number of things. So it's a fun thing to do, but you can't set too much store by doing that.
Sure. I mean, another thing, it's very vague, but you could potentially look at the results and say you placed in the top 10 in the swim and the run, but your bike was in, I don't know, your 129th or something.
Yeah.
It's a very good, like, rough ballpark sort of guide as, okay, maybe I need to work on my biking. Is that something you do as well?
It is actually, and particularly because people that I work with are often trying to qualify for an age group squad to go to the World Championships or European Championships. And they do look at that and think, hang on, if my bike was 30th, but my run was 10th and my swim was 10th. And they can see that that's where they need to improve, really. And it would be difficult to get that improvement from from the swim or the run because they're already pretty good at that and they're already quite near the top. But when there's a massive margin for improvement in one particular discipline, it's quite useful to know. And sometimes it's kind of quite a hard to accept fact, but you see it there in black and white, don't you? And you're like, okay, I'm not actually that good on the bike, am I? I need to really improve at that. So it kind of changes the way you think about it going forwards.
Okay, next bit, Phil. I'm going to get a little bit techie here now, and let's look at the data. And for this, I'm going to grab my laptop because I've got here my last race data from my last pro race, Ironman 70.3 South Africa. And yeah, I just thought maybe we could run through some of the data from that, some of those sort of important points. So I'll run you, talk you through the race a little bit and how it played out. So I came out of the water in the lead, and then Romain Guillaume, French athlete, just smashed it from the off. So I had to make a call early on the bike, whether I go with it or I settle into my pace. I went with it for a little bit and then decided I'd let him go. I know that you know the 70.3 course in South Africa. It just goes pretty much straight up a hill and then straight down on the freeway. So it does throw in some interesting power data for the first half versus the second half. So should we take a look then?
Yeah, let's take a look.
If I highlight the first part of the race here in training peaks, my normalized power is 318 watts versus the second half of my race, 276 watts for normalized power. So the whole race had a normalized power of just over 300 watts for normalized power. Is there anything that you'd pick out from here? Any important data points?
What I love about these graphs is that it's the true story of all your hard work and all your training going into it and how that race played out, and it's all there sort of second by second, minute by minute. And at the start of that graph, I can see you're riding very hard to keep up with the French guy.
Yeah. So I think if we highlight that, so it's around just over, 333 watts normalized power. Now we have discussed this before, actually, normalized power. It's probably worth us chatting about this now. So normalized power takes into account those surges in pace as compared to my average power, which was 306 watts. So the normalized power takes into account those basic accelerations where I'm going suddenly maybe 400 watts, then back down to 100 watts. And that's obviously a lot harder work than just holding 306 watts. And we can see that with what's called my variability index, 1.09. A perfect race would be 1. No one does that. But a 1.09 is quite a high variability index, especially for a 70.3.
The other thing we can see there is that the IF, that stands for intensity factor, says 0.98. That essentially means Mark was riding at 98% of his best pace or best power for 1 hour in a time trial. And bearing in mind an Ironman 17.3 is more like a 4-hour race for Mark or less. So he's essentially going at almost his 1 hour pace in the middle of a 4-hour race. And, obviously there's only so long you can do that for before it's going to have an effect.
That's why I made that call.
It's a good job he did. And also because the first half of that race is all uphill as well. So that's not, you don't want to be starting that with tired legs from sort of burning your matches right at the start. So let's just segment the first half, because when I analyse someone's data, I tend to do it in sort of 3 or 4 key segments. Based on the terrain of the course, basically. Often the terrain changes as you go through a bike route, so it's nice to just break that down into those segments and see what effect they had on your power. So in the first half, you're riding uphill. It's kind of easier to maintain a decent power. And by power, I mean just how hard you're pedaling and how fast you're pedaling when you're riding up a gradual incline like that. So Mark's riding at now 0.94 of his 1 hour pace. So that's still quite high for a half Ironman. So what often happens in any triathlon when I look at someone's data is that they usually are, their power or their heart rate is normally higher in the first half anyway. And then kind of fatigue and the effects of nutrition or lack of start to set in. And then when I look at the second half, it's normally a bit lower. And it's just the extent of how much lower that is that tells you whether they paced it right or paced it wrong, or how well they performed. And if they have gone too hard on that bike section and they fatigued in the second half, you then would also think about how that affects their run as well. So you might be in great running shape, but if you've fatigued towards the end of the bike, that's going to affect your run. So you can't be too pleased or too disappointed about how you do on the run, because you need to look at it in terms of how you've done on the bike as well, rather than just on its own. So in the second half here, it's kind of going downhill. So it's like, as Mark said, it's a bit harder to push the watts when you're going down a hill. And you're going at an intensity factor of 0.81 now, so that's kind of more
sustainable.
More sustainable. We don't have heart rate data here. What's interesting to look at is that if Mark was fatiguing here, his power would go down and his heart rate would go up, and we call that decoupling. And it's a symbol of fatigue. It shows that you're just going a bit too hard. It can also be because it's getting hotter and hotter as well. Sometimes your heart rate drifts up. We don't have that heart rate data here, but Mark has managed to sort of ride a fairly consistent intensity factor of 0.81 in that second half. So I think you kind of got on top of your pacing during that race, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we also picked up on the fact that my variability index was slightly higher on the way back, but that was due to, my max speed was 80 kilometers an hour on the way back. So I'm trying to get traction, I'm spinning quite hard for short periods, then tucking in and getting aeros. So it's an unusual race in that sense. We're not on a pan flat course where I can hold a consistent power. I'm trying to utilize what I've got.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. One other thing was very interesting for me at the time, looking back at my race, was that I actually started to pick up an injury on the run. I'd never had it in training going up to the race, and suddenly I started to get this cramp in my left side. And actually looking at my bike data, and I'm almost 5% difference between the legs at some points during the race, which is a massive, 45% on one leg, 55% on the other leg is a huge difference. Just seeing 1% is sometimes quite a lot. So 5% was a massive difference, and kind of it showed on the run, really.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you pick out data-wise from a race?
The only thing I would say is that not everyone's got a power meter, and when you look at bike data, power is by far the most effective tool for analysis. And if you don't have a power meter, you can still look at heart rate, and power shows you how hard you're going, and heart rate shows you how hard your body is finding it. So they're two different things, but you can use heart rate data on its own for some kind of analysis, and it will essentially show you how you've paced that ride, because you'll see how your heart rate varies throughout, and if it goes up and up and up and up, it might suggest you've paced it a bit too hard and you found it fatiguing. Sometimes heart rate goes down, and that's just because of being a bit too tired at the beginning and then sort of motivationally finding it harder to push yourself in the second half. What I would say is that a lot of people go on speed and time, and they think, oh, what time did I do? What speed did I do? My average speed was this. It's not really that useful. Unless it's a pan flat course with no wind and you're comparing it to another pan flat course with no wind, there's not a lot of comparison you can do, really. Even road surface can make a difference. Another thing that makes a big difference is twists and turns. People don't realise, they say, oh, this is a flat course, I should have done this time. And actually, every time you do a turn, it takes a few miles an hour off your average, off your speed at that time, and that affects your overall average. So it's just things to think about when you analyse it, so you don't come to false conclusions, if you like.
Well, that's been really interesting, and thank you very much for that, Phil.
Yeah, I think it just really emphasises, doesn't it, the fact that sometimes you actually need to take a step back and look on your results from an outside perspective to actually be able to move forwards. And it's also really useful to do it with somebody else and to get that opinion, and just, it's okay to sit and reflect and then be constructive with your criticism, and then you can make more of a structure and take the next step.
Absolutely. And if you'd like to see more videos from GTN, you can just click on the globe and subscribe. And if you'd like to see our video explaining what critical swim speed is, or CSS, as Phil was explaining earlier on, you can see our video just here.